What I'm going to do today is to talk to you about MD-PhD training. I'll make it a little more broad, talking about training to be a physician scientist. I will try to give you an insight into whether this actually is a training option that would work for you. I will talk about the training and the career path of graduates of the program, and I will finally talk about the application process. And so the first question that comes up is, when we train people to be MD-PhD students, what we really are aiming to do is to train people who want to be physician scientists. And what we mean by that, these are men and women who are both physicians and investigators, and they can be mentors, teachers, inventors, and serve in a variety of different roles in academic medical centers, in big pharma, in biotech, in research institutions around the country. You really see physician scientists in many different roles. You see MD-PhDs in many different roles. The physician scientists are individuals who spend most of their professional careers doing research and applying research, where applying research can also be taking care of patients at the bedside, and many do see patients, but not all. I'm a physician scientist and I do not see patients. Many, but not all, do research that is tied to human biology and human disease, but some individuals do different kinds of research, and some may have primarily clinical responsibility with relatively minimal research. And as I said before, they work at academic, medical centers, research institutes, industry and government, and I'm sure you can find them in many other areas of society. And so what I sort of want to talk to you is really, so I said that what you want to do is you want to become a physician scientist. I think MD, PhD, they are degrees, but it's not really a function. It is, I'm talking about what you will do in your later life. So you're a college student and you want to end up as a physician scientist. And the most straightforward way to do that is to matriculate into an MD-PhD program, go through the combined training that is provided in the program, and end up as a physician scientist. But not everybody knows when they are in college that this is actually what they want to do. A rather large number of students have sort of a curiosity about it, but they are in doubt, and I think then they rightfully enroll in medical school. Once in medical school, they may decide that they really want to spend the rest of their life being faculty members, work on a specific disease, and some enroll into MD-PhD programs. Others sort of actually do not really get to this point until later in their career. They may have graduated from medical school, their clinical training, and what not infrequently happens is they see a patient or they come across a clinical condition and they say, this is what I'm going to study and explore for the rest of my life, and they get the necessary training. And they need to have training in order to become physician scientists. And it actually turns out you can do even further, because many in college will get into graduate programs and they may get interested in clinical problems, and some can transfer into MD-PhD programs. But that turns out to be relatively difficult. It's much easier to transfer from medical school into an MD-PhD program than from graduate school into an MD-PhD program, which really has to do with the way in which those training programs is organized. The efficiencies that are built into the dual degree training are to a large extent maintained when you transfer from medical school. They're not maintained when you transfer from graduate school. But if you have a PhD and you want to do clinical research, you certainly can do it, because many PhDs actually work on important human diseases. They work on material from human beings, and they can do all the same research as a physician scientist is doing. The only thing they cannot do, of course, is to take care of patients. So, and I think that MD PhDs and physician scientists in general, they are chimeras who in various ways blend clinical medicine with the discovery and application of new knowledge at the intersection of science and medicine. And you have an MD and you have a PhD, and it is two different lives you actually have in the laboratory at the bedside. And when you look at people who are physician scientists, I think those who have the most satisfactory careers are those where there is a significant overlap between their research activities and their clinical activities. If it turns out that what you're doing in the laboratory has more or less direct implications for the patients you are taking care of, then that's a fantastic opportunity. And similarly, if what you're doing in the clinical setting goes back and inspires you to do new experiments, I mean, then you are blessed. But if the two circles, the science and the medicine, are not overlapping, and if they are far apart, then it can be a difficult career to have, because first of all, there are only a finite number of hours in the day or the week. But even more importantly, you will have to keep up the two different knowledge bases, one in the science and one for the clinic. And it's more keeping up with this knowledge base that ends up becoming a problem for in your long-term career. So the way that MD-PhD training is done is in MD-PhD programs. And nationwide, there are over 100 MD-PhD programs affiliated with medical schools. And 43 of MD-PhD programs are partially supported by training grants from the National Institute of General Medical Sciences, which is part of the National Institute of Health. And these training programs are known as Medical Scientist Training Programs, or MSTPs. And the MSTP program is 47 years old this year, and it has, by virtue of the programs getting support from the NIH comes around every 5 years and sort of kicks the tires and checks out that everything is done correctly. So I think any program that provides both an MD and a PhD provides dual degree training, but the MSTPs have sort of undergone a further so to say, review in terms of that the federal government wants to know that the money they invest into the training of physician scientists is well spent. The aim of the training is to promote physician scientists' career paths, and therefore I think almost all MD-PhD programs offer students financial support, including stipends and tuition waivers. And the reason for doing this is not a sort of altruistic, but it actually is to enable the graduates of the program to pursue the careers that we are training them for. As you probably know, the average debt of graduates of medical schools is on the wrong side of $150,000. And that means when you graduate from medical school, you have financial responsibilities in terms of paying that debt off. And so if you have that responsibility and you have a family, how likely are you then to continue into long postgraduate fellowship training programs where you get a stipend and not a salary? So the reason we provide financial support is that we enable graduates from the program to pursue the postgraduate training that is necessary in order to have a sustainable career as a physician scientist. And the curricula in MD-PhD program mix both the MD and the PhD phases in order to complete the training in about 8 years. And this should be compared with the average training in medical schools, which is 4 years if you just do it the straight way, but increasing a bit because many students take a year off to pursue one or another academic activity while they are in medical school. And the average time to graduating from a PhD program today, a PhD program in the biomedical sciences, is about 6 years, and actually on the wrong side of 6 years. So you save between 2 and 2.5 years in total training time by matriculating into an MD-PhD program compared with doing an MD and a PhD separate. The way the curricula are structured is that they are really continua. The first 2 years are mostly medical school. Medical schools around the country are, of course, constantly reviewing, revising their curricula. But in general, there would be 1 to 1.5 to 2 years of basic medical, biomedical science training, or sort of the foundational sciences for the practice of medicine. In MD-PhD programs, there also would be some graduate school training. In the next 3 to 4 years, there will be mostly graduate school training. You take graduate courses, you do and complete your thesis research, you write and defend a thesis, and then you return to medical school. And the medical school training is in many programs abbreviated. It's not the full 2 years that you have in the standard medical school. And in some cases, there will continue to be some graduate school activities in the final years, but I think only a few programs do that, because since we have taken students out of medicine for a number of years while they did the thesis research, we really want them to focus on the clinical process and the clinical training when they graduate from the PhD part of the training. So I think what is important here is that when you're seeing an MD-PhD program, you're seeing an MD-PhD program. And what I mean by that is that each program has its own unique curriculum, which is structured to make full use of what can be provided by both the medical school and the graduate school, and in my case, graduate schools, as we have 3 graduate schools associated with the tri-institutional MD-PhD program. And so we try to make as full use as possible of what both the medical college and the graduate schools provide, and PhDs can be awarded in a wide variety of disciplines. And I think most MD-PhD students get the PhDs in the biomedical sciences that are fundamental for the practice of medicine. And they are listed here, I'm not going to read them out. But what I want to point out is that as the practice of medicine is changing, you will see increasingly that MD-PhD programs or some MD-PhD programs provide training in bioengineering and biomedical imaging, ethics, in the chemical and physical sciences, computational biology and bioinformatics, and public health, epidemiology and preventive medicine, and social and behavioral sciences. And I think what I want to bring home here is that there is a wide spectrum of training opportunities, but whereas every MD-PhD program would be able to provide training in these disciplines, not every MD-PhD program is able to provide training in these other disciplines. You need to do your own homework, do due diligence, go on the website. If you're in doubt, write the MD-PhD programs in order to be sure that they actually provide training in the area that is of interest to you. And so when you also sort of what the training provides, there will be almost invariably, there will be retreats where students from different years in the program get together, and this becomes important to create overall program cohesiveness, but particularly for students in the research years who are sort of say distributed throughout the campus, it is important in terms of making sure that we periodically get them together. We have MD-PhD specific courses. There are some programs have that, and again, some programs have visiting scholar seminars. We actually do not do that, but we have alumni who come in and meet with smaller groups of students. We find that that is a more effective way of accomplishing the same means, because when we have 3 institutions, there probably are 3 competing seminars going on at any time of the day, and to add seminars from our program would just be a waste of time. We have student and alumni presentations. Students will, in some programs, not all, maybe be involved in the program government. There will be a variety of social events. Programs will encourage students to go to national conferences, etc. And the whole point is that an MD-PhD program is really a community. It's not just a program. And it's important that MD-PhD programs become communities, because it's a long and at times very stressful training that you're embarking upon. And you say there are various stress points when you go from the first 2 years of medical school to graduate school. Your medical school classmates are now going into their clerkships. They get all the excitement of the clinical training, and you suddenly find that you now have to get your sea legs in the laboratory. You have to develop a working hypothesis. That's a lot more stressful than taking care of patients, I can promise you. And your medical school classmates graduate 2 years later, and you are struggling to still identify what is going to be your thesis project. That's another high stress period. And so on. And so therefore, the program needs to be able to provide the support that the students actually feel that they are really doing the right thing, they are on track. Even though it looks like nothing is working, that turns out that that's a norm for various parts of the PhD training. So what happens with graduates from the program? About 90% of graduates pursue clinical residencies, followed by fellowship training. And that means, and this is important, remember I told you that it takes on average 8 years to graduate from an MD-PhD program in order to pursue clinical activities afterwards and have a research career. You have from 3 to 7+ years of postdoctoral training, which varies with the clinical specialty. You'll have fellowship in order to to do research. And 80% of graduates, maybe a little higher, become medical school faculty. And 50% continue to do significant research. These numbers vary from program to program, and most programs would be happy to provide you the information about how their graduates are doing. And what you are finding is that as the programs now have been around for more than 50 years, the first MD-PhD program started at Case Western Reserve in 1956. So we are seeing that many academic leadership roles are now being filled by MD-PhDs as faculty in the basic and the clinical sciences, division chiefs, department chairs, and deans. Whether that is seen as being a step up or down remains to be seen. And there are alternative pathways that including working industry and at research institutions, the NIH, Howard Hughes Medical Institutes, etc. And so what is important is that there are, among also biomedical scientists, there are multiple pathways. PhD graduates, for example, explore processes that govern the function of molecules, cells, and organisms in health and disease. You remember I said early on, when I said the path to become a physician scientist, that you could actually study clinical problems as a PhD, and you would be a clinical investor as a PhD if the research you were doing and the outcome of the results you were performing had a direct correlation with the identity and the specific disease of the patient that had donated the tissues that or cells that you were working on. You can also be MD graduates who do research, and these are usually people who have had significant research experience in medical school and who pursue significant research during and after fellowship training. I have an MD, I don't have a PhD, and I have had a long career as a scientist, and I still have an active lab. But I got the postgraduate research training that was enabled me to pursue this career path. And then finally, we have the MD-PhD graduates who combine the careers of both the MDs and the PhDs. And I think there are advantages in this pathway, but you can do it in either of these pathways too, because a dual degree training provides this integrated training experience, and it provides a dissertation-based research and clinical training, which sort of sets it apart from either of these two training pathways. And as I said before, it requires less time than doing the MD and PhD separately. So how about applying to MD-PhD programs? Because this is one of the reasons you are here. So what kind of individuals do MD-PhD programs seek? And I think it is sort of, we look for the same people really in many ways at engineering schools, law schools, etc. looking for. We have applicants who have integrity and maturity and who show passion for research, concern for others, leadership potential, and also an aptitude for working for others. I think the passion for research is for many programs really a primary criterion for a selection of students, because we want students to be scientists. But I think most MD PhD students are medical students who want to be investigators. They're not PhD students who want to know something about medicine. So, but it is very important that the students in our program will really be good physicians afterwards, because they're actually going to be the leaders in medicine later on. So they are going to have a major impact on how medicine will be practiced in this country. Leadership potential is important because as biomedical research is getting more complicated, and it is increasingly will depend on large groups. And so we see the MD PhD graduates in many cases being the leaders of research teams, and they will be effective leaders of these research teams because since they're trained both as physicians and as scientists, they can effectively communicate with both physicians and scientists and thus lead a group. And that again comes back to they must be able to work with other individuals because as I said, biomedical research is increasingly being a group undertaking. And how do we evaluate our applicants? We look at their research experiences. That's the most important thing. We look at the academic records, including MCAT scores. We look at the personal statements, and particularly that sort of explanation for why they want to become a physician scientist. We look at letters of recommendation from research mentors. We look for evidence that the students in fact care for others. And this is a difficult thing to do, because in medical school there's sort of a more or less set expectations for what you need to have done in terms of sort of saying that you have know something about medicine. People look about medical school look for extracurricular activities. The extracurricular activities that we care about in MD PhD programs is what you did in the laboratory. So we assume that the primary extracurricular activity of a successful MD PhD program will be the laboratory. But we are very interested also in other extracurricular activities, and also we look carefully at life experiences. That is, what would you provide to the program in order that we have a diverse student body who will go out and really satisfy a number of different pressing needs that exist in the American healthcare system, academic medicine. And one of the questions that always come up is what constitutes a substantive research experience? Let me tell you what it is not. It is not having done a laboratory course or two as part of your undergraduate training. We really want you to go into the laboratory, a research laboratory, where the answer to the result of the experiment that you're doing is not known. And you can do this by working, having multiple summer projects. You can do senior thesis research. You can do 1 or more years pursuing research activities after your undergraduate degree. In the end, what we are looking for are two things. I actually have only one of them here. But we want you to be familiar with the idea of testing a hypothesis. And we also are looking for something, and that sometimes it comes out in the life experiences, sometimes it comes out in the research experiences, and that is resiliency, ability to recover from failure. Because what every scientist knows is that the only way to have a good idea is to have many of them, because most of them will fail at some point or another. And so if a student is in the laboratory and sort of just gets paralyzed when their favorite working hypothesis turns out to be wrong, they are unlikely to be successful in their future career. And so when we look at people who are applying to the program, what I really like to see, I had this great idea and I did the definitive experiment I thought, and I didn't get the result I was expecting. And then I talked to my advisor, and we came up with that the fact that either that our idea was wrong, but based on other results we could formulate an alternative hypothesis, or we identified the fatal flaw in the experimental design, and I went back and redid the experiment. That's what I like to see. The fact that you have spent 3, 6, 9, 12 months in a laboratory, but sort of everything has gone smoothly, doesn't tell me how you actually are going to be as a graduate student. And some statistics, they are national, they are about 4,900 MD PhD trainees, and in the 2010 entering class there were 38 women and 38% women and 9% of matriculants were students of diversity, where I'm pleased to say that in the tri-institutional MD PhD program we are threefold above the national average. And 34% of MD PhD applicants, and this is important. So, I mean that a third of the applicants to MD PhD program actually matriculated into an MD PhD program. So the total applicant pool for the 2010 matriculation was 1,779, and that's a number that I actually know is correct because we got it from the AMCAS database. There is a specific application for dual degree training. Of the applicants nationally, the average MCAT was 31.3 with a range from 4 to 43. And I think this was a little optimistic. And there was a GPA of 3.6 with a range from 1.9 to 4. In the matriculants, and there were 611, as I said, 34% of the applicants. The average MCAT was, as expected, higher than that in the applicant pool, 34.5 with a range of 23 to 43, and a average GPA of 3.8 with a range of 2.7 to 4. And the reason why we have this range in both the MCAT and the GPA is actually what I said a little earlier, that what we are looking for are people who have the ability to become a scientist. There is, and we therefore sometimes can say this particular individual has strengths that are so extraordinary that we are willing to overlook certain other apparent deficiencies. And that is why I think that MD PhD programs actually, although it's a very rigorous selection process, in some ways are more open-minded than the medical school process, because we are looking for people who are going to be scientists. We are looking for people who actually are going to be iconoclasts, to move and push the envelope, find new knowledge, change the way we practice medicine, change the way we do research, and hopefully come up with ways in which we can improve the nation's health without increasing the cost of medical care nationwide. If you look at the statistics for MD PhD applications, here we have the distribution of scores, and you see here, this is in blue the total number of applicants, and in red the matriculants. And what I think again stands out here, that if you have an MCAT between 27 and 29, 17% of these applicants were successful matriculant into MD PhD programs. If you have an MCAT between 39 and 44, about 2/3 were successful matriculants into MD PhD programs. And you may say, how come not every single person in this category was accepted? And the reason was that we are looking for investigators. There are certain people who will be fantastic physicians, but who didn't demonstrate to our satisfaction that they had what it took to be a successful scientist. And if that is the case, we do not matriculate them. And, but I think most of these individuals got into, or probably all of them got into medical school, but because we are looking for somewhat different phenotypes. And if you look at the GPA, it's sort of the story is the same. You have that of students, applicants who had GPAs between 3 and 3.2, about 10% were successful matriculants. If you go up and look at applicants who had GPAs between 3.9 and 4, 50% were successful matriculants. And again, it's because we are looking for, we are not, I mean, the MCAT and GPA certainly is important, but it's not the sole criterion that we use to select who should be matriculated. We look at all these other factors that will in the end determine whether you're going to be a successful physician scientist. And it's not just GPA, it's not just MCAT, it is just have been somebody who has been out, done a lot, explored a lot, and really shown that they have the curiosity and the tenacity that they will make it as physician scientists. Application timeline, and this is important. So the application is to AMCAS, similar to medical school application, but when you go onto the AMCAS website, there will be a specific application process for the dual degree training. Instead of the one essay you have for medical school, there will be 3 essays that you have to write. One on the same one that you write for medical school, why you want to be a doctor. Then there is one why you want to be an MD PhD, why you want to be a physician scientist. And then there's one where you describe your research experiences up to that point. And that description of your research experiences is very important. I'd read it very carefully for our applicants, because I want to see that the students actually have thought about what it is that they are doing as they go through these decisions. There will be secondary applications, there will be letters of recommendation. Interviews are from October to February. We actually interview twice. The first interview will be Thursday, October 27, and the second one will be Thursday, November 17, and then we are done. No more interviews. We may have decisions in mid-December. And so if you apply to us by the medical college deadline, which is October 15, it is very difficult, if not almost impossible, for you to have your application complete by November 1, when we need to have the applications complete in order for us to find out whether we should invite you for interview. We make that very clear on our website. I really would strongly encourage you to submit your application, have the application complete at the AMCAS website by August 1, no later than September 1. And I would say August 1 is when you should have it done. And when we look nationwide, there seems to be a trend towards earlier and earlier applications. As I went out yesterday, I checked what was the status of our applications. We have 470 applications as of yesterday. We are running 3 weeks ahead of last year. I don't know if that is the economy or if it is just because all our applicants are more obsessive compulsive than they were last year and therefore have the applications in a bit earlier. Because last year we were running 2 weeks ahead of the previous year at this time, but the final number of applications were only about 10 higher than what we had the previous year. So I think what is happening is that everybody is getting their applications in earlier, and that is important because any program has a certain number of interview slots that they can fill. We interview 70 students. And the reason we interview 70 students is that we interview double the number that I expect to send out letters of acceptance. We shouldn't interview more. It's unfair to applicants that we invite more because it is expensive and it is time consuming to travel for interviews. And we don't increase the number. Since we don't increase the number of slots, it just means that each person we invite will have a lower chance of being accepted. It is unfair to faculty because they're going to interview more students without having an increased chance of getting students into the laboratories. So therefore, when we screen the applications, and it's a continuing process, begins sometime in early mid-August. we are a little more forgiving early in the process. Every program is more forgiving early in the process. When I come to November 1 and I may have 50 applications that are got complete within the last 5 days, and I may have 5 interview slots. So now it is 1 in 10 who actually statistically can get invited for interview, whereas we actually invite about 1 in 7 overall. So you're much higher chance of getting invited for an interview if your application is complete early. But different programs have different styles. You should again do due diligence. Go on their websites, find out when do the interview and so on. So you're sure that you tell the faculty members who write letters that you have to have the letter in early, because otherwise I'm going to have trouble in being selected to be interviewed. The final decisions are made between November and March. As I said, we do it in some programs have rolling decisions. We have one decision day. We go through everybody and then it's done. And I think it works well for the students. It works well for us, because you know then that you have being accepted to our program, and you know so early that it will have implications for what other programs you decide that you want to visit and to be interviewed at. We have revisit days in March and April. The process is complete by April 30th. That is the date by which all students must have made a decision about where they are going to go. There will be a little bit of manipulation, move around in waitlist in early May, but by May 15, we know where every MD-PhD student who will matriculate in 2012 will be. And programs may start any time between June and late August. Some programs have an early start, so they have the first research rotation before medical school begins. Others begin as medical schools begin. So what should you as applicant look for in an MD-PhD program? You should look at the research environment, and that means you should look at the faculty, the students, programs, and the supportive opportunities. And I think what you really should look at is the students, because as one of my colleagues recently said, a program is really the students that at any particular time are matriculated in the program. They are the ones, I mean, there are other things that also form the program, but it's the students who are the key ingredient. It is the students who will be your peers, who will push you up, and if you didn't choose correctly, who may pull you down. And so you need to look at the students. Do they have what you would like to, are they like you want to be? Are they people who you can see they are my peers, they may even be a little above my peers, they are going to pull me up? Because that's the group. You want to be in a place where there's a lot of excitement, where whatever you want to do, there are people who you can discuss it with. You want to look at the academic environment, sort of the science and the clinical curricula, which is important, but I think not as important as the research environment. It's important to look at but again I would say lower down program organization. You look at what the alumni of the program have done and the community involvement. And the reason you look at the program organization is that, as I said earlier, this is you are there for a long time. You need to know that the program is structured in such a way that you will get the support that you need. I think it's very important to look at the location. The training lasts 7+ years, and if you need to have mountains around you or meadows, you don't come to New York City. We have some greenery in Central Park where there are also a few rocky hills, but it's not what will satisfy you if you really need to be in the Rockies. And I show slides of the streets of New York, so you see this is the environment where you're going to be. For some people, they couldn't stand living where there were meadows, and others can't stand living where there is where the concrete is, and you have to make a decision. Is this an environment where you are going to be happy for the duration of your training? And finally, an overall sense of belonging, or that this is a good fit for you. And that's a very non-quantitative measure, but you will find out that you sort of feel comfortable when you think about it, and you say, that's probably okay, that's where I'm going to be. And so there is a lot of information about MD-PhD training on the AAMC website. You can either just www.amc.org, MD-PhD, or just Google AAMC MD-PhD. And do you have any questions? Yeah.
When would you think it's too late to get started in research opportunities as an undergraduate?
In a way, it's never too late. I would more say, because if you start late, then you would just have to do research after you graduate. So most successful graduates probably have had between 2 and 3 years of research by the time they, at least 2 years of research by the time they apply for to the program. What the least effective way is to do research the summer before you intend to apply. I would say that's useless. If you haven't done research before, then you need to take at least 1 year off, and I actually encourage students to take 2 years off, and I'll explain why. Because what is very important for us is to have letters from research advisors. If you graduate from college and then start working in a research laboratory in a different city, different place, where they do not know you. And then if you apply for an October 15th deadline that year, your research advisor will have known you for a couple of months when he or she should write the letter for you. And it can't be a very good letter. So you need to stay the year that your research advisor knows you. And therefore, when you apply, you will really get a strong letter. So in general, I would say, unless you stay in the laboratory where you worked in undergraduate because there was a project that you wanted to complete, a 1 year research leave after graduation, so you apply just after graduation, is not the most effective use of your time. Do 2 years. Where there are, in some cases, that does not quite apply. Say, if you have a strong research background and you, say, apply to 1 year specific training programs abroad, in some case, people will then look at what you did in college, and that's fine. But in general, I would say, if you haven't done enough research, if you feel that you have not done the research that you should have done in college, plan to do 2 years, and then look very carefully at the laboratory where you are applying. Because you want to be sure that you are in a laboratory where you're not just sort of, say, a routine technician who is washing bottles and preparing the media. You want to have a project that is your own. And I always recommend students to look at the post-bac programs at the National Institutes of Health. It is a fantastic opportunity, and they have a variety of also structured educational opportunities that really works very well for students, and we have had a number of students in our program who have just been astounding. Yeah.
Is there a particular type of research that is favored over another?
Depends on the program. I have rather eclectic taste in this, so I'm probably more open-minded than many, but I would say it has to be research that is where you're doing something that is hypothesis-driven. I mean, it has to be research that, in a sense, can fail. As I said before, I want to know what it means to test a hypothesis, and also find that your favorite hypothesis has turned to dust. But I think some programs would favor research that has been done in the more, sort of say, standard biomedical sciences. Other programs, and sort of what you call wet bench research. Other programs would be very pleased also with much more theoretical studies. And in our program, we have a very large, or in the three institutions, very large initiative in computational biomedicine. So we have a number of people who has not had much wet lab bench experiments, but have had a very large experience in doing computational modeling and so of various kinds. And that works. There are people who have been bioengineers, who have, made devices, and there are, I think those are, I would say those are usually the most successful. But anything where you can say you really have had to work hard, where you've had to think critically, and you can demonstrate also how it had long-term impact on the way you approach problems, would be fair game and would be acceptable. Not in all programs maybe, but enough programs that are important. And that, by the way, reminds me something else. When you apply to 10 MD PhD programs. And the reason is that we have about 500 applicants, plus or minus. I mean, plus or more likely minus a little. And as I said, we interview 70. Of the 500, I would say that 200 or so are really of maybe 250, are really of very high quality. I don't think that I truly can predict who that 20 or 30 years later will be the person who is going to lead his or her particular field. Because you are still so young, you're still so unfinished in a sense when you're going to project that long time forward in terms of how you will do. So that means, I said we interview 70, so we interview about 1/3 of the applicants who almost certain will be perfectly good MD PhD students. Other programs have the same problem. And so when you get a letter of recommendation from us on a rejection from us on another MD PhD program, that doesn't mean that you are not qualified applicant. It just means that, and it doesn't even mean we don't love you, it just means we loved somebody a bit more, at least the day we made the selection. But so you need to be sure that you there let the law of large numbers work in your favor. You have to assume that for reasons that have nothing to do with your qualifications, that you will just randomly not be selected for interview in some programs. And so you need to be sure that there are high quality programs who will invite you. And then you just, as I said, don't be discouraged by the fact that other programs will not. And so you need to have enough applications out that you don't get stuck in the fact that you were just unlucky that the one program you applied to, you were not invited. And you also, like you did for college, you apply to a range of programs. There are some that are reaches, there are some that are safeties, and you fill in the spectrum in between. And as I said, and when you get acceptances, then every time you get accepted to a program, you decide what programs can I now write off take off the list of programs that I'm going to say interview at if I get invited. Because it takes, as I said, time and money. If you're being accepted to the tri-institutional program, you will decide there's some programs I'm no longer interested in because the tri-institutional program will fully satisfy, or maybe not fully, but sufficiently satisfy my needs. But there's some programs you still are going to interview at because they may be able to provide you even more. And that's the same for any MD PhD program in the country. And so you need to have that breadth of applications out.
We're running out of time, but I just want to make sure that we get one question in from our online viewing audience.
Yeah.
And it's one that was coming up frequently during your presentation. You talked about how important it is to acquire significant, meaningful research experience. And the question that came up frequently was, how does one get started with that? Who does one talk to? Where can one go to get that, to get the connections, to get into the laboratory, or to gain that research experience?
Okay. The first thing you do is that you go to your college where you are. You go up and you can talk to the guidance counselor, but you can go and talk to the academic counselor in the departments in areas that you are interested in. Then so that's one way, and you will get directed to specific faculty. You can talk to them. And you may find that what you are looking for, you can't really get that experience in the college where you are. And in that case, what you often should do is you should talk to the department chair what it is that you are interested in and ask him or her whether they can recommend people around the country that would be suitable, who might be suitable research mentors. Also, another thing is that you, in a number of places, institutions have summer undergraduate research fellowships. And so you go on to the website, you search for SURF or their various SURFs, and you just find what institutions have it, and there you don't apply to a research advisor, but you apply to the program. And so you apply to, again, a little bit like to MD PhD program, you apply to a number of these research fellowships, and you see if you get accepted, and then you will, once you have accepted, they will then catalyze the match of you to faculty. And so normally what will happen is that you will be giving a list of available faculty, and you say, these are the ones that I think are cool, and that way we can be matchmakers. Another way of doing it is that you, in a course, become excited about a particular topic, and then you find out who is working on this topic. I mean, you see there's a reference to a paper or so on, and you write, you send an email to this individual and say, you know, I heard about your research in my lecture, and I think this is really very exciting stuff, and would you by any chance have an opening for an undergraduate in your laboratory this summer? Don't be shy, you should write. And some people may have personalities where they do not reply, some people are just very busy, but you may also get replies and say, well, unfortunately, my lab is busy this year, or too full this year, and that's okay, because most labs have an absolute limit on how many students they will take in, because if they take more in, it'll compromise the quality of the mentoring. But they may say, but my colleague down the corridor is looking for a summer student, and I will forward your email to him or her, and that way you can also get into these. So I get a number of these emails around over the year, and I try to see if I can match the interest of the people who write with my colleagues, my research interest.